Welcome to the Authentic Life Podcast. My name is Satwa, and I'm here to help you seek, speak, and live your truth daily. This podcast is for the sincere spiritual seeker who is ready to explore the deeper, sometimes uncomfortable truths of their psyche and spirit without the spiritual bypassing. I'm here to empower you with the psychological teachings and spiritual insights to help you live your most authentic life. Warning, you will get triggered, you will feel uncomfortable, you will be challenged, and that, seeker, is where your journey begins. I'm so excited to share this space with you. Thanks for pressing play. Let's begin. Hi, Seeker. Welcome back. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Life Podcast. Today we're going to talk about, drumroll, pseudoscience or fake science, con science, whatever you want to call it. I'm a little bit sick, so you have to excuse my voice. It might actually be COVID. I'm waiting for my test, which will suck because that wasn't part of the plan. Anyway, so this topic was inspired this week because somebody asked me about what I think about Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I damn near lost my shit when I heard that name. So I went on this tirade about con mans and cult dynamics and how science is weaponized to bamboozle people. And it's such a delicate topic because, well, first of all, I'm a huge science nerd, and I'm also a spiritual seeker, and I always try to harmonize the two because actually I think science and spirituality are one in the same. And to be able to integrate the two takes discernment, which is something that I also talked about this week in my Instagram posts, and gave some very clear examples of what discernment means and how important it is, especially when it comes to our beliefs. Because no matter what we believe or why we believe it, it really comes down to how we believe it, which we can believe through the lens of discernment, which, makes space for context and nuance and perspective and shades of gray, and also makes space for the greater unknown. Or we can believe through the lens of dogma, which is very rigid, very, very black and white, and very dangerous when it comes to being indoctrinated into a cult. And that could even just be a cult party of one, you and your own cult with your belief system. So circling back to why pseudoscience is such an important part of this is because, well, science uses very specific kind of language to describe, experiences, describe phenomena. And for most people, lay people, including myself, we're not, even I, as much as I consider myself a scientist, I'm not, I'm not like a neuroscientist, like doing complex research in a lab. I'm not a epigenetic scientist. I'm not this expert in science. I'm not as well versed, right? I do know research really well because I studied research, so I can discern good science from bad science. But if somebody tells me about some chemical compound right? And I think they're an expert. Like I'm gonna believe them because I'm just not versed in that area. So science becomes a way for people to weaponize and to to weaponize our ignorance, so to speak. So anyway, really long intro there, but today I want to talk about pseudoscience, and I want to highlight some elements of pseudoscience and some red flags to look out for, so that, if somebody's throwing scientific jargon at you and you don't really know the discipline that they're talking about, there's still some ways that we can be discerning of whether or not what they're saying is complete bullshit or if it's grounded in some truth. And so how we can spot the red flags and how we can familiarize ourselves with the deception tactics that fake scientists use and how we can detect them, just in terms of what to look out for. And like I said, I have a background in research. I served in academia for over 10 years. Both of my master's degrees are heavily research-based. I've, co-authored and published in peer-reviewed journals. So I'm pretty familiar with the scientific process. And that's not to say that I know everything about it. Of course not. But I am comfortable enough to talk about it and to point out that, all this to say is to point out that even with a scientific background and my training, I got carried away, going back to Joe Dispenza. I got carried away by his work when I was reading it and heavily into that. And I really believed it, not because I thought it made a whole lot of sense, because, my logical mind kind of knew that a lot of it was just like a bunch of bogus, but I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe it so bad. And I was really married to some of my beliefs. And that's what I was talking about in the beginning, is that it's not about what you believe or why, it's how you believe it, right? And when we are not discerning, our beliefs become our dogma. And that is what I noticed so much about the law of attraction, the new age circle, because even though what it seems like they're preaching, love and light and growth and transformation and healing and all this is, it seems like it's assuming to be good for you, but the beliefs themselves are approached in such a dogmatic way that it traps us. And I, being a scientist, ignored the red flags. I ignored my logical mind, and I was lying to myself, and I was willing to be lied to. And that's how powerful these deceptive tactics are. And that's how we get conned and persuaded and indoctrinated into an ideology. Anything can become an ideology. And that's what these pseudoscientists really are selling to us. And they really know how to do it. They know how to bamboozle us. They're actually really great marketers. And, they know our journey. They know our avatar, like they call us, which is a weird thing to call people, but it's marketing language, right? Your ideal client avatar, your niche. So like, it's just creepy how much they study us, and, they study us, they study our journey. They know how to appeal to our emotions through compelling storytelling, and they use science as part of that practice. And I'm exploring this a lot deeper with my email community these few weeks. I'm going really deep into the qualities of a con artist, the strategies, the tactics that they use, and all of the cognitive biases that they appeal to in us. And so if that interests you, you should definitely sign up for my email list if you're not already. So anyway, what is pseudoscience? I just realized I didn't even give like a definition. So pseudoscience is a term used to describe a claim that is supposed to be a product of science, but is not based on empirical evidence. Empirical evidence. Really important to understand that. And for something to be empirical, it needs to meet the 4 following conditions. Number 1, it follows the standards set forth by the scientific method, which is a 6-step framework that outlines the process of conducting an experiment. Number 2, there needs to be full transparency in the research methods and the procedures that are used, because the results of a study need to be replicable in order to be valid. So replicability, number 3, is when another scientist goes in and is able to conduct the same experiment using your exact same methods and procedures, and they would obtain pretty much the same results with very little variability, but more or less the same. And number 4, the findings are peer-reviewed, meaning that it's gone through your research, your ideas, your hypothesis, your methods that you used, has gone through a rigorous process of reviewing and validating your results by the scientific community of experts in your field. So pseudoscience misses one or more of these conditions. And in a lot of cases, it misses all of these conditions because it either doesn't involve the standard procedures for conducting an experiment, or all of the material and the equipment used is produced by one person or their team or a network of people that are affiliated with them, which what Dr. Joe Dispenza does. Or there is no peer-reviewed research involved. There's a lack of transparency in the study procedures. It leaves out really, important information, which makes it impossible to replicate the results or impossible to disprove the findings. And another thing is that they just make up words or terms that are not used by other scientists in their respective field. So they blatantly ignore the actual science that contradicts their views. So, for example, Dr. Joe Dispenza, because I'm just on my rant with him this week. By the way, he's a chiropractor, and he uses this title to self-proclaim being a neuroscientist, where, most neuroscientists, it's not just something that you call yourself because you're interested in the subject like that. Most neuroscientists are PhDs. They are involved in some graduate level, PhD level research, and they're constantly publishing in their field. So the fact that he self-proclaims this already itself is a red flag. And relatedly, he's super vague about his credentials too. There's no info on what his bachelor's degree is in. It just says Bachelor's of Science. Why would you withhold that information? It's shady. It says his postdoctorate training is in neuroscience and neuroplasticity. But again, most neuroscientists would agree that these credentials alone don't make someone a neuroscientist. And finally, my favorite part is that his chiropractic degree is from Life University, which is not even accredited anymore. It lost its accreditation due to insufficient training. So there's a lot of red flags there. Just the fact that he's clearly inflating his credentials I would say that he's intentionally misleading, which would make him a con artist. So, maybe we can give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he just has this he believes in what he's saying, and he's just deeply programmed by the cult that he studied under. But the fact that he's very clearly inflating his credentials, this motherfucker knows what he's doing. I'm just going to go with the fact that he's a con artist. And if you look into his research, most of his findings, most of his quote-unquote research articles are published by the Heart Math Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that has its own journal in which the editors are also the scientific advisors. I mean, that's a conflict of interest, right? So somebody sent me this angry message saying I should look up Joe Dispenza's scientific advisory. It's you mean his friends? And I did. And it's some guy named Doc Childs. His name is Doc. His actual name is Doc. He's not a doctor. That's just his name. He has no medical training or relevant credentials. There's some other guy, Roland McCready or whatever. He has some impressive list of memberships, but if you actually dig into the memberships, it's really fishy. What the hell is Pavlovian Society? What is the American Autonomic Society? Why do you have to pay $300 a month membership to get access to their subscription to see what the stuff that they're publishing? That's not real research. Real research is very, very transparent as possible. So this is not legit, right? Literally anyone can create a society or an NGO and fabricate their way through. I mean, just look at Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos, who created a multi-billion-dollar fraudulent tech company. This shit happens. So, most people are not going to go through the painstaking effort of looking up every single board member or the legitimacy of every organization that a person is affiliated with, right? Most people just take this stuff at face value. And I don't blame them. It's a lot of energy, it's a lot of time. It's who has time for that? But the good thing is that you don't have to go through this taxing research process to determine if someone is a real scientist or a fake scientist. If you know some red flags to look out for. I'm sure there are many, many red flags, but I have identified 5 that we're going to get into here. So, number 1. Quick fix solutions. I think the biggest red flag is when someone offers quick fix solutions to complex problems that just seem too good to be true. If it's too good to be true, there's a chance that it might be true. There's a slight chance, but for the most part, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And this is related to using science to make wildly unsubstantiated claims. So fake scientists have a tendency to avoid complexity. And they do this with simple solutions, right? They offer simple, feel-good solutions to complex problems. And it's not just one solution to one problem. I'm sorry, it's not just a simple solution to one problem. It's a simple solution to many, many problems. It's a simple solution, blah, blah. It's a simple solution for many problems. Yeah, I don't know why I just tripped up on that. So for example, they'll say, oh, this is a magic pill, an essential oil, a meditation practice, an essential oil And it's going to solve a host of problems like weight loss. No, not just weight loss, headaches, and also acne, and also insomnia, and back pain, and depression, and anxiety. I mean, they have this tendency to like lump all of these conditions together because these are really, really common issues. I mean, who doesn't suffer with an insomnia at some point, or acne, or weight loss, or depression, or anxiety, right? It's like a horoscope. Like, it's like very common issues that people can experience at any point in their lives, and they just let it kind of throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks, because someone is bound to be like, oh yeah, I suffer from adult acne, and also I have anxiety. It must be because I have all of these toxins in my body that this one vitamin is going to help flush out. Well, first of all, like, what the hell are toxins? Like, that is just so vague, right? Like, these vague, ambiguous words, buzzwords, also a red flag to look out for. And secondly, there's no way to control for other variables in that scenario. So let's say a person takes this vitamin and their headache might actually improve, or their acne might actually improve. And they subconsciously, already believe in this vitamin. They're already like so sold on this vitamin. They might also, just be so motivated to heal themselves, which is a great thing. And then what happens is, the placebo effect kicks in. And because they're so motivated to be better, they might start adopting other behaviors, like not eating like shit in the morning, or they drink more water, or they started exercising, and lo and behold, right, you start to notice some positive effects. And when you really, really want to believe that the positive effect is because of this one thing, you will subconsciously rearrange and restructure your environment, your physical environment as well as your inner environment, in a way that optimizes your chance that those beliefs will be confirmed. Confirmation bias. This is how powerful beliefs are, because they are so intimately tied to our emotions, which are just as powerful. And we'll talk about that in a moment, because that's what trips us up. Like I said in the beginning, I was so married to my beliefs about the mind-body connection, which of course, like, I still believe in the mind-body connection, of course, but I'm just a lot more grounded about it. I believe in what it is, and I also believe in what it's not. And I have discernment to know the difference, because discernment is one of my highest values, where in the past it wasn't. I valued my intuition and my feelings and my own personal experience over discernment and critical thinking. And I think a really nice place to be is not one or the other, but an integration of all of them, right? Where my intuition and my feelings and my personal experience are integrated with my discernment and my critical thinking. And that's just where I evolved to be, because at the time that I really believed in this stuff, my truth was most important above all else, because I was deep in my healing process and all of my energy and my effort was directed towards that. And there's really no mistake in that. Like, I made a lot of mistakes, sure, but I'm always going to make mistakes. It's part of the process, right? The difference is now that I can make better mistakes, and better in a sense that, my mistakes offer a lot more room for complexity and nuance in my life, which is what makes life so beautiful. Context and nuance, they reflect a much more expanded way of experiencing the world, more textured, more layered, more depth, right? So the mistakes that I make within that complexity allow for so much more growth and learning and healing, and also connection. And life takes on a different quality of beauty when we make room for those complexities and for those nuances and not the quick fix solutions. That's like junk food. It's very satisfying in the moment, and then it just fades and you crash and you feel like shit. And, it can be good on some occasions. Certain occasions it can work, sure. And they can certainly have time and place. But again, they lack that real depth and complexity that is a lot more true to life. And that's the exact ingredients of good science. Good science is never about the quick fix. And a good scientific experiment will try to get as close as possible to the objective truth while controlling for as many confounding variables that might interfere with the results as possible, including our own cognitive biases. And that's why the scientific process exists, and I respect the shit out of it, because seeking the truth is as scientific as it is spiritual. To me, like I said, they're one and the same. They're two sides of the same coin. So ignoring one is a disservice to the other. And that is this balance that's so beautiful, right? It's striking that balance of not just one and done, but, the integration, the constant flux, the changing, the complexity, the nuances, the aliveness, right? It's life, and how we navigate the known against the great unknown is this practice of discernment, which is, a beautiful concept in non-duality as well as in science, because both encompass that complexity of life, right? Discernment helps us to navigate those complexities with grace and with humility. And like I said, like even everything can become dogma. Even science can become dogma. Science can also be very cultish, no doubt about that. I mean, academia is one of the biggest mainstream cults there is. And I got so disillusioned and burnt out by academia because I didn't have that balance, because I was disconnected from myself and my spirituality. And that was a big catalyst for my own spiritual journey, which was fine. But, then I went into the other extreme, which is that's what tends to happen, right? And it's just now I'm coming back in this full circle moment where I'm going back into academia, but with a new perspective, so I can make better mistakes that will contribute to my growth. So all this to say, be wary of solutions that offer a panacea to multiple complex problems. Be discerning, learn how to hold nuance and paradox, and don't get bamboozled by oversimplified quick fix solutions. So, I'll give you an example here and we'll move on to the next point, but just saying something simple like thinking positive thoughts can reprogram your DNA and cure chronic illness, right? That's so incredibly, it's like some Joe Dispenza bullshit. It's so incredibly oversimplified and reductionistic. It takes concepts from these really complex and huge disciplines like neuroscience and epigenetics, which, by the way, are still in their infancy. It uses this one small grain of truth to dress it up with exaggerated benefits and fake science, right? Real science is never that simple. So these oversimplified, generic, ambiguous statements that seem so appealing because they promise a magical cure is a huge red flag. Real science does not care about being appealing, feel good, or any of that. So I bring up this one point, this clarity, this point of clarity, that's the difference between saying that the mind-body connection can help us understand certain long-term chronic diseases versus the mind-body connection can reprogram our DNA and cure long-term chronic diseases, right? There's a very important difference in that. So that's how it takes a grain of truth. Like, yes, like our cells are highly adaptable. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know much about epigenetics, but like I know that, yes, our cells are highly adaptable and can be mutated, but there's no scientific evidence to show that we can reprogram our DNA to cure disease. I mean, that is like such breakthrough medicine, right? Like that's like we can cure cancer with that. And as far as I know, there has not been a cure for cancer. You see, so they take a grain of truth and they exaggerate it. So watch out. Watch out for these oversimplified explanations that seem too good to be true. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Number 2, fake scientists never want their research challenged, which is related to the third point, which is that they are not taken seriously by the scientists in their respective fields. So, huge red flag when someone gets really defensive when you start poking holes in their theories and their research, or they choose to ignore the actual science that contradicts their views. I've had so many encounters like this with these LOA holistic psychologist people. They you criticize one point and they just like get mad, right? Block you, get defensive. And that is like a huge red flag. Like if you want to test someone's integrity, like just challenge them and see how they respond. In actual science, there's no scenario where your work is not being criticized. In fact, real scientists want to have their research challenged. That's what the whole like defending your dissertation is all about. Any real scientist would be readily acknowledge that there are plenty of mistakes in science. You know, you need to make mistakes in science because you need to rule out all possible explanations to find the truth, to find what works. And it's a misconception to think that science is there to prove something. There is no proof. Science is simply about getting us closer and closer to the truth. It's about being as less wrong as possible. And again, we get closer to the truth while protecting that truth against our own cognitive biases. No study is 100% perfect. But if you follow the steps of the scientific method, then the outcome of it might not be great science. There's still shitty science out there, but it's not pseudoscience, right? There's a difference between shitty science and pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is that quality of trying to, design your research to give you the results that you want, as opposed to, shitty science, which is not going to, produce some miracle outcomes, but, you're still at least trying to determine an objective truth about the world, right? And you're controlling for all of these variables. So there's a standard, right? There's a standard of procedure for collecting evidence that exists for a reason. And, these pseudoscientists, like they don't follow that, so their results can't be replicated. And it's a big reason why they say that, like the excuses that they've made, like their claims are beyond the reach of science, right? When they're trying to prove the existence of God, like it becomes this like impossible argument because they say like, well, it's beyond the reach of science. Like, well, yeah, duh, but that doesn't really say much, right? Or science doesn't have tools to measure the thing I'm talking about. Well, okay, but that still doesn't mean that what you're saying is valid. scientifically, or we don't need to test this product because we already have the proof. Like, red flags everywhere, which it brings us to number 3. This is the reason why they're not taken seriously, or they're largely ignored by their peers in their scientific community, in the scientific community of their field. So if you want to know somebody's legitimacy, just see, like, what are the other scientists saying about their work? Because real science is accomplished by teams of people who have been researching an issue for decades. So how likely is it that this one person is going to come along, discover some secret or magic pill, and, their peers are just going to blatantly ignore it, right? Like, if we had a cure for cancer, don't you think more people would know about it? Don't you think, like, that would be a big deal and more people would be healed? Or are we going to go with the conspiracy theory that mainstream media and big pharma wants to keep people sick? And that the fault in that thinking, like, I'm not a, mainstream media, big pharma proponent myself, but there's a really big fault in that kind of thinking. And the mistake there is when people mistake stakeholder interests or interests of privatized groups with scientists, with individual scientists, because scientists are not the millionaires of this world. Most will be lucky if they reach a near 6-figure income in their entire lifetime. Okay, the work of a scientist is incredibly rigorous and unrewarding in terms of wealth, fun, fame, popularity, recognition. They're not recognized. And it's such painstaking work. I mean, there's a reason why I dropped out of academic research, because you choose a subject, you fall into a hole because it's just like never ending, right? There is no solutions. It's like this, you just fall into a hole and that becomes your life. So unless you really, really, really love your chosen field and you want to contribute to that field, you will not last a day in that environment. So for some quack job to come in and hijack a grain of truth from your years of research just to make some exaggerated claims and sell people a very unsatisfactory and vague solution to a complex problem is not just disrespectful to the scientists, but also to the entire field of science, and not to mention it's a huge disservice to humanity. It's intellectual dishonesty and an abuse of science, of scientific concepts. Number 4, profit. Pseudoscientists are doing research to make money, okay? They're not doing it to help people. And again, I'm talking about individual scientists here, right? The ones who are in their lab coats day and night, whose work we will never hear about, who do not get recognized for their work. Okay, we have this tendency to try to find a hero in every story, right? Like, behind every Steve Jobs is an entire team of scientists that we will never know about, who are largely underpaid and undervalued for their work. But I am willing to guess that they are incredibly fulfilled to know that they have contributed to humanity, because they were never in it for the money and the fame in the first place, okay? Real scientists don't have this motive of money and fame. Otherwise, they would have chosen a different profession. Like that, you don't get rich and famous in science, in this field of science. Our society is not set up like that. So if a scientist, a quote unquote scientist, is rich and famous, I would say that's a red flag. Okay, it's not to automatically discount them, but you should probably investigate into how their work has been critiqued by their peers, and also the profit models that they use to get rich. Because any kind of helping profession where you're in it to help people, if if you're getting rich, like if you're going into it with this motivation to, manifest this multi-bajillion-dollar mega empire, unless you are willing to use some unethical profit models to do your business, there's a conflict of interest there anytime you're in a helping profession, right? Because if you're using unethical business models to help people, are you really helping them? Okay, so rich, famous, scientist, there's dissonance there. Investigate into it. Number 5, lastly, be wary of people who rely on personal narratives and anecdotal advice or evidence that is, that they use as proof. So that's not scientific, okay? Like personal narratives, anecdotal evidence is not scientific. What it is purely a predatory marketing strategy. And it's predatory because it appeals to our emotions and discourages us from critical thinking. Okay, it uses very compelling narratives to capture our emotions, to weaponize our emotions, especially emotions like fear, anxiety, loneliness. Right? It's this notion of, if I can do it, if I can heal myself through this magic pill, through this positive thinking, so can you, right? This is the anecdotal evidence, or they bring up these testimonials of people who have, achieved the impossible, right? What is his slogan? Joe Dispenza. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things, or whatever. It's not that ordinary people can't do extraordinary things. It's that this is an inconsistent comparison. I'm saying that just because this person did it, you can too, is not a consistent way of comparing to outcomes, because all of the variables are not controlled for. Right? If I can do it, you can too. It completely ignores the reality that people have very different circumstances, and for some people it's much harder than others. Right? It's possible for me, so it's possible for you. It ignores the fact that we don't all have access to the same resources and opportunities or time. So people who say this either are trying to capture your emotions so that you can bypass your critical thinking, or they just lack awareness of how other people live and what obstacles that other people might face that might prevent them from succeeding, or might make it much more difficult for them to achieve the same things. Right? We don't all have the same upbringing. We don't all have the same life story or the same strengths and weaknesses. We don't have the same genes. We don't have the same wiring in our nervous system. And in fact, it would be a really, really boring world if we did. So it's not surprising then that the majority of people who use this narrative of, if I can do it, you can too, are the ones who sit high up on the privilege ladder in society. And they just blatantly fail, consciously or unconsciously, they fail to acknowledge the social and structural limitations on success and how we are treated. So what these people have to rely on is personal narrative. And the more emotionally charged they can make these narratives, a near-death accident or being diagnosed with some terminal illness. Doctor said that I wouldn't live past 6 months. The more emotionally charged the stories are, the more they capture our emotions, and the more easily persuaded we are when we are emotional. Because when we're emotional, when we're flooded with emotion, the executive functioning part of our brain shuts down. We are in a emotionally charged inner environment, right? And we're desperate to seek some order, some sense of stability and control. And so when somebody offers us a quick fix solution, and we're in this kind of, destabilizing emotional inner environment, we are more likely to jump on it, to believe it, to be persuaded by it. This goes for everyone, right? Nobody is exempt from this. This is just human nature. Everybody can fall for this at different points in their life, right? We've all felt discombobulated at some point. We've all had the experience of, getting the rug pulled from underneath us, or, life throwing a big wrench in the matrix, right? These really destabilizing situations where, or something like traumatic, right? A death, a divorce, like situations where we were questioning our reality, and we don't know what's real, and we become this like open, vessel for information to just like pour in. And there are people who are waiting because they know your avatar, right? There are people who are just waiting for you to reach that point so that they can come in and they can weaponize all of that, use it against you, and make you buy shit. So, what else did I want to say about that? There was one more point that I wanted to make about personal narratives and why they are not the effective way to. Right. So personal narratives. Another point is that they don't account for the possibility of unlikely and atypical outcomes. So an unlikely outcome will happen if there's enough times that something happens over and over and over again. And I'll give you an example. So this is a real statistic. 99% of people who invest in MLM, multi-level marketing, and pyramid businesses, 99% of them lose money. But it works for that 1%. And if you think about, if 99,000 out of 100,000 people lose money, but 1,000 people are successful, right? This is an atypical, unlikely outcome. Then all it takes is for those 1,000 people to write raving testimonial, and now it looks legit, and we believe that because we have something called the base rate fallacy, which is a type of cognitive bias where we ignore the prevalence of something in favor of individual information instead of integrating the two and considering context and nuance and being discerning. So, anytime that I've ever challenged someone on their "if I can do it, you can too" belief, they're so quick to point out, how they've done it or how their students have done it. But of course, we don't hear about the thousands of people, or the 99%. I mean, that's a high number, the 99% of people who they haven't helped, right? They just stick to that 1%. And that's why they get so super defensive about it, which it goes to that point where, they don't want to be challenged. There's a lack of transparency there. And the reason why they do this is so that, you can lie to yourself, or they can lie to you, or they can facilitate you lying to yourself. So, okay, well, I'm getting tired of speaking, so let's wrap this up. I'm going to give you 4 deception strategies that pseudoscientists or fake scientists use. And I also did a video of this on Instagram, but I will repeat it here to kind of tie a bow on everything that we talked about. So 4 deception tactics used in law of attraction. And this isn't just applying to law of attraction. This is just like a good lesson on critical thinking, which can be applied to, so many other industries where some of these same tactics are applied, right? The wellness industry at large, the food industry, like the organic food industry, the beauty industry, right? All of these industries that are, so desperate to set themselves apart, and some of them are based in really good grounded science, but a lot of it is also just fluff. And so, these are kind of common deception tactics that can be used in a way that, weaponizes or uses our ignorance against us. So, number 1 is using ambiguous language to make generic statements that don't say anything beyond what is implied. This is also called a truism or a self-evident truth, where, an example of this is the grass is greener on the other side. These like kind of cliche statements that are generic, they're ambiguous. So for an example of this in law of attraction is positive thoughts are better than negative ones, right? That's a very ambiguous claim because positive and negative and better can mean different things for different people in different contexts at different times. And in fact, we know that, excessive positive thinking can be quite harmful. Number 2 is citing results that are atypical or fall outside normal distribution of outcomes. So this is kind of going back to that point of using isolated facts or anecdotal evidence as proof. So, somebody who says that they manifested a lot of money using LOA principles, law of attraction principles, well, that's an atypical outcome, and that's likely due to a combination of other factors like luck and privilege that they're not being transparent about or they're not considering. Number 3 is making unsubstantiated claims that are assumed to be correct but have not been scientifically validated. So, for example, saying law of attraction itself, I don't know if you ever thought about it, but that itself is an unsubstantiated claim, because for something to be a law, there needs to be a cause and effect that must always apply in a repeated experimental condition. But LOA has never been tested in that way. And that's why they rely so much on anecdotal evidence and personal narrative and, storytelling. And lastly, they take a grain of truth and they exaggerate it to be intentionally misleading. So going back to that example that I used earlier, the difference between saying that the mind-body connection can help us understand chronic disease versus a grain of truth, the mind-body connection, and then an exaggerated claim, can alter our DNA and cure chronic illness. I did it, so can you, So look out for these red flags. And that's it. That is it, Seeker. I hope you found this helpful. I hope that it serves to guide your critical thinking and your practice of discernment. And I'll just leave you with the wisdom of, being in the unknown. I think a lot of times why we hanker after these quick fix solutions is because we are deathly afraid of the unknown, right? It's such a scary place for the ego to be. And it's so incredibly, challenging for the ego to say, to be in the unknown, to admit that, we are operating within this larger unknown, and we can get as close as possible to the truth using science, using inquiry, right? We can integrate all of these different philosophies and disciplines to get us as close to the truth, as intimate as possible to the nature of reality, as close as possible to ourselves. There's gonna be we're still operating within the larger unknown. And that's that practice of surrender, of humility, right? It's so many things, and it's not just a one and done type of deal, right? It's a constant practice. It's an ongoing practice. And to be, I think, in this energy of surrendering to the unknown while still investigating and inquiring and exploring the truth and the nature of reality and ourselves is a beautiful practice of staying open, but not so open that our brains fall out. So have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out, but being discerning. So anyway, I will leave you with that, and thank you for hanging out with me today. I love sharing all this with you. I would love to hear your thoughts about it, so you can shoot me an email, or you can find me on Instagram, and we will talk soon. Till next time. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Authentic Life Podcast. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends on social media. Just don't forget to tag me at Seeking with Sattva on Instagram. Seeking with Sattva is an international spiritual development brand that has helped thousands of seekers heal, grow, and consciously evolve on their journeys. To learn more about my work, to sign up for my Authentic Life newsletter, to read my blog posts, or to work with me one-on-one, visit my website at seekingwithsattva.com. Stay tuned for some exciting new updates, offerings, and guest speakers coming your way soon. Until next time, keep going, keep growing, keep seeking and speaking your truth so that you can finally live an authentic life.